Alaikum, thank you for the introductions. I think after the first two keynotes, this is a very appropriate panel because we can now build on some of the themes and get into some of the specifics. So there are a number of questions that we'll be addressing. So I'm going to be requesting the panelists to give their comments, and we will have about 75 minutes for this discussion. We'll try to stay focused. So the first question which I would like to pose to our panelists is basically, because we are talking about beyond survival, the role of business education in business resilience and innovation. So we may want to start by getting an understanding of what do we mean by resilience and innovation in our own context, and why and how important is resilience and innovation for businesses in today's world, given the context which Dr. Ishrat set up and given the specific information about the Pakistani economy that Dr. Nadeem provided us. What would be the importance of these two things, and what factors are responsible for the increased need for resilience and innovation in today's era, and specifically not only in Pakistan but across the world. But I think we'll try to focus more on Pakistan. So I would like the panelists to volunteer, otherwise I'll make a cold call. Who would like to start? Maybe
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much, Dr. Zahoor, for this cold call. My 2 cents on this topic, and specifically with respect to resilience and innovation, would be the way I look at it. I would see resilience as more reactive and innovation as more proactive, or at least that's what my understanding is. So resilience is more a response to a crisis, a challenge, a deficit, a setback, and where we as business schools, we as businesses, we as leaders of business schools and businesses, our societies, we have to be resilient. For example, we have to be resilient in terms of our commitment to certain values, our commitment to certain skills, our commitment to certain goals, notwithstanding the deficit, notwithstanding the challenges that we have faced or we face currently. Innovation is something which is more risk-taking. Innovation is something where we are trying to explore new territories, explore new horizons, create new value for our students, new value for our faculty members, new value for our society, organizations, businesses, and so on and so forth. I have further reflections on this, on the topic of resilience and innovation in the context of Pakistan, but I will come back to this a bit later.
Thank you, Jawad Sahab, for the opening bit. I would just want to put a little bit on what Dr. Jawad Sahab has said. Resilience, it is important to define what resilience is. And resilience typically in the business education or management context means, I'm not sure if it is entirely reactive, but what it means is that can you withstand in the time of difficulty? And you know, in sports, we relate it to the mental toughness. But we're also, the businesses are beginning to realize that resilience is not just an attitude, but there is also a skill or a competency that defines resilience. So, for example, does our system have robustness enough to bear with the exogenous shocks that a business faces, or the business education faces, or crisis faces? But if you couple the innovation with it, there is a possibility of two different trade-offs that are, so there is a view in management scholarship that are resilience and innovation complementary, or are they actually, there is a, little bit trade-off between the two things. So when we think about innovation, we are talking about disruption or doing something at a faster pace or with an agile mindset. And that necessarily means taking risk or doing something that would cash on the opportunity that is out there but the decision it may or may not be resilient in the long term. So for example, you might end up doing things which are brilliant ideas, just like we are seeing with now the crash down of the startup culture, that they were fantastic, it was very fashionable, that we are taking risks, we are doing things that business schools have not taught us. But now we are getting to know that there wasn't enough resilience because they were breaching some value systems or bleeding the money or burning the cash. So I think it is an important puzzle. How do we see resilience as a part of innovation, or can we build a resilience in a way that will innovate but is also durable?
Well, I think those two concepts are related. For example, if you are used to a certain pattern of natural or man-made shocks, then you should be able to develop the capacity through innovation to withstand those shocks. And there are anticipated shocks coming from the pattern of the past, and you can learn from that and you can prepare for it. More difficult is a situation where these are unanticipated shocks, and also they are exogenous, which are not susceptible to your policy interventions. There, the innovation is post-fact rather than pre-fact. And there is the difficulty which the countries, the business is face. Now we can prepare our students in the business education for the anticipated shocks and have them to innovate in order to face those. But the second attribute for the unanticipated shocks is that they should be adaptable to the changed circumstances and try to create the solutions to those problems within a particular specified time to minimize the damage and the loss. So it's a damage control rather than a resilience. And that is where I would draw the distinction.
Given, again, just building on what you said, given the current situation, and I think what has been shared in terms of the challenges that we have, it will be clear that they need to be very resilient because a lot of difficulties that they have to overcome. And what we have had many shocks, many difficulties, and the businesses have to adjust to that and be able to sustain themselves and survive. There's no shortage of difficulties. But that also provides huge opportunities for innovation. So I would like to take this thing to the next level, this discussion to the next level. What are those factors that could actually enhance the resilience of business organizations? We're not talking about business organizations, and create the ability to innovate. What are those things specifically in the context of Pakistan? I'll come to you for the business school question, but I'd like to go back to my earlier colleagues with their own extensive engagement and understanding of business. What are those factors which are currently driving the challenges in this area, so that we could identify those factors and then maybe come up with some approach in terms of I mean, some have been mentioned earlier, but besides that, can you think of any? I mean, we have the mention of our fiscal issues, policy issues, maybe skills issues. So those we have already talked about. Anything else which comes here?
Okay, I would want to answer this question very specifically in terms of my experiences with executive education with large utility companies and oil and gas companies and hospitals over the last 10 years, mainly in Karachi when I was with KSPL, and also recently with some retail sectors in Lahore. One of the thing in innovation is the collaborative mindset. We're talking a little bit about the softer side now. We talked about the economic issues. And within collaborative mindsets, there is a lot of focus on building culture, leadership. But one pain point that I come across with executives is the concept of psychological safety. That is, can they take risks without the apprehension that they would be penalized for that? And I think that is where the core of the resilience innovation nexus joins. So I built up the scale that has been used by Google to assess the psychological safety in the workplace. So that simply means if I'm in a team and Dr. Ishrat is my boss, can I disagree with him or question his ideas without worrying that he's going to chop my head? And that means, am I willing to contribute to the new ideas in my team meetings and in my collaborative practices? And the psychological safety scores in Pakistani organizations have been very low. And I did a leadership program of building high performance team, about 12 or 15 cohorts over 1.5 years. And every time we would do the team assessments, the score of the ability to risk my ideas at the cost of reward or penalize, the scores would be very low. So I think that is one, in our cultural context, the psychological safety or the collaborative mindset, I think that is one that needs to be explored more.
I'd like to go to our panelist who is sort of online. Your comments on what we have been discussing so far.
Thank you very much. Yes, I see here there are it's a very interesting discussion, this link between resilience and innovation. And building on the idea of resilience, you know that resilience is originally part of physical characteristics of materials, and it has been further developed in psychology. How can one person, one individual become resilient to very harsh chapters of one's life, which means that you want to go from survival only to revival kind of thing. So having, again, a good life. And in organizational settings, that's also the same idea. It's how can we, when we are facing an external shock that was not anticipated or could not be anticipated, how can a company survive, but not only survive, also rebuild a new life? And here is where psychological safety is a key word when it comes to individual ideas inside the company, into among employees. And on top of this, I would add the idea that the organization should have a growth mindset based on learning, capacity to learn from the situations. Because I have been observing companies that at least praise for collaborative practices, but at the end of the day, do not apply new ideas, do not change their way of doing things. They always have a reason why they would say, this idea is interesting, but here it doesn't fit. Or we already tried 20 years ago, it didn't work. Or this requests too many resources. So it's a kind of resistance to new ideas despite collaborative practices. And this is why companies should really, through their governance, learn to be a learning organizations, meaning with trying is key in innovation and resilience. It is true for individual level, it is true for organizational level. And I would say that, and I will further develop that, it's also related from my perspective, to really having a more ESG perspective. So companies, there is some papers that have shown that companies who have engaged in environmental, social, and governance development and approach have a higher level of resilience because they discuss more, they engage more their own communities. They engage more, for instance, their suppliers, not only their customers and their employees, but also suppliers, also communities, also policymakers, in order to understand the environment and find new solutions to crisis in a faster and more resilient way.
Comments. I think we'll move on to the next question. So given this understanding of what is needed to enhance resilience and innovation, the natural next question is how can business schools contribute in this process? Because we are supposed to be there to provide support and resources for the business. So I'd like to start with Caroline. How would you respond to this question? How can business schools help organizations become more resilient and innovative? One thing we all know that we want to develop individuals who can be resilient and innovative. So I would like you to talk about issues or things which could be done besides developing those individuals. What else can business schools do to help organizations become resilient and innovative?
Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Professor Zahoor Hassan, for your question. It's a pleasure to be here in this discussion panel. Okay, so I think business schools are the most important pillar in this question because they are forming the next leaders and the next entrepreneurs. So there is a question here that it was not brought yet about the risk takers, to be a risk taker. We have this problem in Portugal. I'm going to give you my example. People, there is a tradition to have a salary. There is a tradition to have a salary from the government. A long tradition about that. Okay, and to take something safe instead to risk and to go behind what you have. So I believe that the most important thing is not only to talk about resilience and innovation, is to talk about how are you available, are you capable of taking the risk. And I believe the universities must be a source of openness. The first thing of education is to be a source of openness. And to tell people that you must take the risk if you want more. This is the first lesson that business schools must have to their students. I don't know if I answered your answer.
Oh, sure.
Because I can detail certain factors.
So you
but this is
need to
important.
make sure that people who go through the business education go back with a positive attitude, right? So they are more hopeful, they are more positive, and they are willing to do new things. Okay, so we will build on that. Any thoughts on the second question?
Thank you. One thing, Professor Zahoor, which at least I have noticed in the Pakistani context is this, that there is at least some emphasis or some superficial emphasis on development of skills and development of competence and development of leaders. But where I see a major deficit across universities and across business schools, that we are not focused on development of values-driven leaders. So if I were to identify two purposes of a university or two purposes of a business school or any other school, those development of skills and competence. So that would be the first purpose, development of skills, professional competence, vocation, and so on and so forth. But the second element, which is often ignored, is development of values and development of ethics. So for example, Dr. Ishrat in his speech, he did identify that Pakistan currently faces a major issue of polarization. Call it political polarization. I would say that I would not remain confined to this. Religious polarization, sect-based polarization, ethnicity-based polarization, socioeconomic status-based polarization. And unless we as universities, unless we as business schools acknowledge this, that this is a major issue, and this major issue needs to be addressed through our, for example, through our curricula, through our pedagogy, through our various education and executive education programs, which have to be measured. And the performance or the lack of performance of our leaders, it all on an annual basis has to be evaluated based on those parameters. I think these are the important things to do. Allama Iqbal, our national poet, he says that na ho tabiyat hi jinki kabil wo tarbiyat se nahi sanvarte. So it's not just a matter of tarbiyat, it's also tabiyat. It's not. Thank you. That's really reassuring. So it's not just a matter of professional competence. It's a matter of where I lack. I lack in my own personal character, and that's why I have not been able to train my own students. That look, in addition to professional competence, we need people who are values driven.
I just wanted to respond to the risk taking. When we started the entrepreneurship course, we carried out a survey of the BBA students, and it conformed to the empirical studies which show a normal distribution, which is at the tail end, you have only 10 to 15% who are really risk takers, and 85 to 90% are either risk neutral or risk averse. So you have to actually convince those at the tail who are risk takers to come and join the entrepreneurship course, which is high risk taking, because everybody wants a secure job, 9 to 5 with the salaries and others. So we have a very small proportion of the business school students who are really going to take that risk. And how to convince them and how to bring them to improve the capacity of the business organizations to be innovative and resilient is the challenge for our business schools. And I think this is a small proportion. It's not a large proportion. And therefore, the challenge is that how do you transform them into useful professionals who can really take those concepts in practice when they join the business organizations.
Dr. Carolina, your thoughts on this?
Sure. Thank you very much. It's a very interesting discussion. Thank you very much. I think business schools need, on top of what has been already said, my take on this is at several levels. The first one, I think that professors should be open to continuous learning themselves, and not only about their topic, as they usually do with their research, but also about other topics, because we have a highly specialized professorship in business schools. And what we see in the reality is that organizations face complexity, organizations face situations where they cannot have only a strategic answer or a financial answer or a marketing answer. And my observation in business schools is that professors are not always open to kind of discuss in the program boards where I sit, for instance, in order to discuss and make sure that all the courses have a red thread, so that the message to students is consistent. We are putting some emphasis now in sustainability, for instance. So we put courses on sustainability. We put courses on business ethics. It has been mentioned, on business ethics, so much. We put emphasis on entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is also a big deal, and I agree, not everyone is open to taking risks. And by the way, entrepreneurs do not take stupid risks, indeed. What it characterizes an entrepreneurial mindset is more that they can deal with it. They accept risk. They still sleep at night, even if they are facing high risks. It's not that they are somehow irresponsible. And so entrepreneurship, but it's also very important to know what entrepreneurship is, because even in a big company, having an entrepreneurial mindset will make a difference into that agility and that innovation we were talking about. And what my observation is that professors should be more open to think about their own capacity to teach these things into their areas. We need business ethics in finance courses. We need business ethics in marketing courses. We need business ethics in strategic courses. We need sustainability in finance courses. We need sustainability in marketing courses. We need sustainability in strategic courses. And definitely leadership is related to values. And I think there's a big emphasis on values now with all this sustainability approach. And those values are the respect to nature and the respect to society, which is already a lot, and more talked than really done. And business schools are not very good at being consistent in those messages. I see some students telling us that depending on the courses where they are in, some of us teach them a very highly shareholder perspective only, still today. And those professors are not necessarily old, they can be young, and we all know it's not a matter of only of age, but they are not updating their own mindsets. And so we see that this has an impact on students if professors don't make this effort to update themselves and accept the world as it is evolving, We need to make sure that our younger students still want to work in the current world. And we see that they resist more and more to the traditional approaches of organizations. And one of the things it's important here to explain to executives when we have executive education is the importance to move on in order to attract young people to enter our organizations. We need those young people, and those young people do not make many trade-offs any longer if you are not showing deep values of ESG in your organizations. And business schools are not always very consistent with that.
Thank you.
First, I would want to just reinforce the entrepreneurial mindset, because I think that when we critique too much on this 9 to 5 jobs, sometimes I feel that we are leaning on to extremes. As Dr. Nadeem's presentation showed, the industry's productivity is also kind of stagnant. So they also need intellectual talent. So when we go and say that everybody has to be an entrepreneur and break yourself from the shackles of 9 to 5, sometimes I feel we are going over the board, because when they become entrepreneur, they're also going to hire somebody to work 9 to 5. So I that's entrepreneurial mindset versus the entrepreneur, and that's, I think, the tied to the resilience. What I was going to say though was also that risk-taking is also a tabiyat. Taking inspiration from Iqbal. Some people just do not have the tabiyat. That doesn't necessarily make them inferior students. So, people need to excel where they can. But going back to the examples of resilience and business schools and what we do and what we don't do, this may not go down well, but I do feel, because COVID-19 in history is a reference point for resilience. And when universities went virtual or online, and when we returned back to campuses, I feel that the students have showed more resilience than the faculty. So when people were virtual, the students took the opportunity, I'm not saying all, but as a comparison, they built more newer skills than the providers of education did. And we did not move too much beyond just managing the Zoom and MS Teams, but they utilized their teams to build a parallel source of income in gig economy. So they came back with freelancing, they came back with doing things on Fiverr, they become influencers, whether we like or don't like their taste, but they did something where they could show more resilience and stay in an income class to support their education. They learned skills like drop shipping, they became Amazon sellers. And now what I see, especially at UCP, that we have very different undergrad class dynamics. And in a lot of sense, they do know a little bit more or different than what faculty knows. And that is where the frustration of the teacher is, that why is he or she not taking interest in the case study I am teaching, but because they do not relate themselves with that kind of future. And I think they have shown more resilience or skill reorientation than we have done. And I think there is much on our part that is desired to offer what is going to be a revivalist and interesting for them. And one of the things that Dr. Ishrat Saab said is exactly got to do how we evaluate and measure these students. Because we make it so boring for them with 40% final and 30% midterm, that the experimental things that they've learned in the window they were away from campuses, they're not able to experiment and apply them in the universities.
So that's a good link to the next question which I'm going to ask. But just to summarize, I think we had a very rich discussion. I think what I am taking away from this interaction is that before you can think about contributing to the resilience and innovativeness of organizations, business schools themselves have to be resilient and innovative, number one. And the starting point has to be second. On entrepreneurship, I'd just like to add one bit. I've always believed that it is not about entrepreneurship. It is about the spirit of enterprise. That you are going to create new things, you're going to do new things that could be within the same organization, that could be with yourself. You don't need to be working for anyone. You could be, and the faculty has to be the role. If the faculty is doing the same thing that they have been doing for the last 10 years, you can't expect the students to pick up the entrepreneurial skills in the entrepreneurship course. So I think the spirit of enterprise has to show up within the business school, at each individual level, in our processes, the way we grade, the way we structure things. So I'm going to now move on to the next question, and this will be sort of building on the last comment which Dr. Athar made. Now, in this whole situation, let's try to identify some concrete steps which the business schools can take to actually play there. What will be those 2 or 3 things that you would like business schools to actually do differently or to build upon? And again, I'll start.
Thank you. Well, departing from your last idea of taking, there is a need to have a sense of enterprise. That is the first, I believe, that is the part of the university. Because if you offer a platform, okay, you have to teach the future leaders to have management, to a business plan, and that kind of stuff is difficult for a student. And to have a sense of enterprise. Okay? So one thing is to have a scope, another thing is to put it in practice. An innovation, create value for the society. But we need the means to create that value. So I think the business schools, and I bring this example is of course. My university is very focused on technology and entrepreneurship, but it's not the only example we need. But I believe this is very important, this kind of service that help students the community to set their own ideas and to set their own business. So that's what enterprise.
Okay, okay, fine. We'll build on this, but again, I would like the panelists to comment on this idea. Does the faculty member also have to depict and his commitment to taking risk and to be full of enterprise. Because if the faculty member that is planning is not depicting some of those values, are you then going to limit this to just one course of entrepreneurship? Most people will take maybe reluctantly because they have no idea of their own business. What is the role of the faculty? Can you comment?
Okay? You can have the best textbooks, the best, but you need an attitude and a proactive attitude for them to, for, as I said before, you should be the center of focus. And that attitude to, for instance, you can use you have usually elements of okay? Why not to transport? In my class, why not to transform one final project? Why not to put people together, working on something that can have in the life of the day, one day. But as I told you, this is very important because if you don't have the platform, if you don't have help, and you don't feel help, okay, you need also the capital and so on, but if you don't have the capital, that you cannot.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody like to take?
I just wanted to answer your question by saying the faculty member is not taking autonomous decision. He's influenced by the incentive structure of risk and rewards. So if your criteria for the career progression of that individual are very much cast in stone, that this is what you have to do, I don't think you should expect them to deviate from that, because that is what their butter and bread is about. So unless you link it up to the incentive structure, where I said they should be able to carry out innovation, experimentation, new university is the user of new ideas and new thought processes. That's not what is happening. They have become conformist, and for innovation, you have to be non-conformist. You are challenging the existing paradigm, and you are trying to replace that by a new paradigm. So you have to link it with the incentive structure. And ours is frozen in time. I think since the 1925 or 30, and there hasn't been any progress. So you cannot have two schemes, one for the faculty member and one for the accreditation and AGC, because the faculty member will fall by the wayside.
Maybe, yeah. Dr. Carolina, to comment on that. Yes, please.
Okay, so then I'll be fast. Thank you again. My take on this, and building on what colleagues have said, I don't fully agree with what has been said. I think that if a professor is not partially or totally intrinsically motivated, we do have a problem, because this should be one of the reasons why one would want to be a professor. If you want to earn a lot of rewards, get a lot of rewards or income, then you go into entrepreneurship, for instance. So this is why I think if you're not fully externally kind of impacted in the way you teach, you really have to have your own intrinsic values there. That's one point from my perspective, of course. The second one is that I don't think that a professor's job is to be a model of what he or she teaches at all. I think that a professor has to be aware of what he or she is teaching and bring people into the classroom who represent that model, like a very good entrepreneur, like a very good leader, etc. A professor has to be good in pedagogy, in being able to make the students learn. And so this is why sometimes I see professors who are excelling into content, but not excelling in the way they create the courses. And by the way, this is in general not very valued in business schools when we come back to the reward system. And so self-awareness for professors is absolutely key. I am able to tell to my students who I teach leadership, I am not a good leader myself, okay? But I can be a very good leadership professor for you. And I will show you with the whole class design that I have done and so on and so forth. So I don't see students need to see that a professor has an entrepreneurial mindset to learn entrepreneurship. No, but the class setting, the design has to bring in people who will show entrepreneurial mindset concretely and to give tips. And as you said, having technology or a setting where students can practice. That's my perspective.
Yeah, just to add, I did not mean that the person has to be an entrepreneur faculty, but when you bring in different people, get out of your comfort zone, by start leveraging, you are indicating one characteristic. Are actually trying to accomplish something beyond your own capability. That's one thing which an entrepreneur does. Yes.
Yeah. I would like to add something and following what Cristina said, because I think it's important. The question of failure. For instance, I'm in a society where failure is a shame. It is another thing that you have to learn to teach the students. So, they have to fail. They want to try something. Very well. Shame is a problem sometimes. It's a barrier. Okay? And I tell you a story. And he told me, but let me tell you when I was 5. I want to give you the example when I was 5. He was a student in the United States, and then I studied there as well, and I felt that failing point is not so complicated. It's very accepted. And he said to us, okay, let's go to this class when I lost 5. Okay, because if I lost 5 somewhere in time, then he said I know more than the people that never tried. So this is something that we need to teach the students.
So my follow-up question to this. Then where do business schools need to change? What do we need to look for when we are, if we are saying that, okay, we want to promote non-conformity, looking for that. Should be looking for people who have taken some risk. Our current systems don't actually accommodate it. We are looking at vocation, we are looking at. But if a person has never taken a risk, never shown an inclination to get out of the comfort zone, that's his issue, because at the end of the day, it is the faculty who is going to make things happen.
I think back in 2001, there was a Hollywood movie, and its title was What Women Want. Now, how do I connect this with this panel? That's an important challenge. I think that the way we write a journal paper, the way we write a strategic plan, we start with a gap.
we start with the identification of the gap. Where exactly is the gap? What exactly is the need? I think that the business schools and the universities and the leaders of institutions, they really need to identify what the businesses want. And not only what do they want, what do they need? Number one. Number two, what does the Pakistani society want? Number two, what does the Pakistani society need? I think this is important for us to identify. This has to be settled. It has not been settled as yet. According to Jawad, चलता हूँ थोड़ी दूर हर एक राहबरों के साथ पहचानता नहीं हूँ अपनी राहबर को मैं. We are just following shadows. We are following the Harvard model. We are following the model. We are now following the NLAP model. We are following the ACSP model. What exactly does the Pakistani context mean? What exactly do the Pakistani organizations mean? Once these questions are settled, then I think it is important. It would be relatively easy for us to identify what kind of faculty members do we need. So
the first thing then would be for those associated with the business schools to start spending serious time outside the business.
outside. The more a person like me spends time in my office, in my cozy office, the more I'm doing injustice to my employer, which is the business school, and the more I'm doing injustice to the society and the businesses which I'm supposed to serve.
Okay, so I think this for academic priorities have to be adjusted to the local realities, and for that we need to understand the local realities. Okay, what would be ways in which we could encourage this? Now I want to better. How do we now take these steps so that this starts happening? I'm going to keep you maybe we are doing something interesting because I want to look at some examples of already the school may have already started.
Taking inspiration from Dr. Jawad, some culture of office another name. I think I want to go a little bit back to what Dr. Ishrat said and what Helena related. I think it's not about not having vision. It's about, I think, what Dr. wanted to say, that if your extrinsic structure of motivation is so rigid that is eventually going to deplete your intrinsic motivation. And I think it is a very important point to address for all business schools, and whether the hurdle is caused by NBAC or HEC or whoever, if the business schools, I think we all know what local realities are and what we need to do. At the same time, we cannot ignore the reference points of ASCS we are Warwick or Harvard, because we do learn from somebody who is better than us. That's obvious. So we cannot say that we start mediocre because we want to be our own self, so we remain at lower level. If we want to take an inspiration, we take inspiration who is definitely better than you. But I think what is very important is that the flexibility is the keyword. And if there are not multiple pathways available for faculty to develop, we'll be having the same problem again. So I think when I was at LUMS, there were multiple pathways. You could be on practitioner track, you could be on teacher track, you could be on research track. And it is not about the non-value of journal articles, it is about the mushrooming of the low-quality journal articles. That is a trap, which is making the good research look bad too. So I think that's what we want to avoid. But if there are not multiple pathways that are going to support the creative vision, the enterprising vision of the organization, we are not going to get out of it. I think that's for me is very important. And it's a structural problem. The way the business schools are structured, that you have to spend certain amount of time in an A position before you can go into a B position. If there are not multiple tracks available where people can pursue what they are passionate about, I don't think we are going to see much creative and those spaces.
What you really need is to reshape the wardrobe of your having both you and is exposed to the consultancy for the corporate sector is a part of the learning process by the faculty who come and disseminate that these are good practices, these are the bad practices, and this is what you should avoid, what you should not avoid, and your training there. Open up consultancy to the faculty members, allow them a large chunk of the proceeds to be preempted by them, and 1/4 should go to the university for the overhead expenses. Allow them to start their own companies, and they can use their students also as a part of the learning process. If you do that, then the problem that you have your finger in the pie. You know what the corporate sector's needs are, and you are actually preparing your students. So it's a two-way street. You're helping the corporate, and you're helping the business schools. This dynamic interaction between the faculty and the corporate sector, to me, will bring about the changes we are talking about.
Dr. Carolina, your thoughts on this?
Thank you so much. I think we have here also to look at things at two levels. One is the organizational level, what the business schools rules, norms, regulations, what they value, how to modify that so that we are more consistent with what we want to have, what we want to do, our mission. Because currently, my observation is that we have been all trapped into the Shanghai ranking expectation and requirements. And since this was created from scratch, for some reason, France, for instance, was a country that was very much resisting to it. It's no longer resisting to it at all, because it has been so much embedded into this ranking of universities based exclusively on English written publications, has done that today anything else you do in your business school, even if it's absolutely necessary for the community, for the students, and for the future of the world, is not valued. So here we have a challenge, I don't know at what level, but a very high one. One could be to be a bit rebellious towards that at the business school level. I would have expected the EFMD to be a bit rebellious towards that. Okay, that's one point. When it comes to the faculty member level, I think it's so difficult. Some of us, we do consulting. It's, for instance, also a little bit my case, some of us. But in general, the motivation for a faculty to become a faculty is because you are a reflector, you are a theorist, you are attracted by this type of cognitive motivation. And it's so different from what entrepreneurship or even strategic or operational consulting can be. I would say that my observation is that in our master of research teaching and in our doctoral programs, we should do what we do in our professional masters. We should oblige the students to work in teams, because faculty are not accustomed to work properly in teams, sometimes for publications, but that's all. We should make in the doctoral program something more hands-on, so that students must go and see companies, because the doctoral programs are creating the future teachers, the future professors. And if you don't do it during the doctoral program, it's very difficult to do it afterwards. And I've been myself trying to influence doctoral programs, and I see how difficult and how much resistance there is into doing that. Even courses on how to teach properly are not part of most of the doctoral programs. And so I would, for instance, I would invite or I would hire, if I was a dean, hire professors who have done an MBA on top of a doctorate or a PhD. Because when you do an MBA, a full year MBA, in whatever country, not necessarily in a Western country, you are somehow obliged you have some theory, but you also are obliged to be hands-on, to create a venture, even if it's not a real venture afterwards. You will have to cooperate with other people, you will have to co-decide, you will have to conduct a consulting mission, you have to go to make interviews for corporate purpose issues and so on. And that would be a good way, I see. We are for instance, in my school, we are 2 or 3 of us who have done an MBA, and systematically we are those who have good ratings in executive education. And I think executive education is where you can have a little bit of influence on society or on business at the short term.
Thank you. I'd just like to add to that my own experience of over 35 years of recruiting faculty and dealing with faculty. Those individuals who come with some industry experience are much more inclined to do things that we have been talking about. So I think those who are coming in with a purely theoretical background, I think we need to give them an opportunity to actually get immersed in industry in some form, maybe through an MBA, through some internship. That we have been sort of talking about, giving them some time. Dr.
I just wanted to add, because you talked about the examples, UCP has a faculty internship program as well. So we have, just like we have students going for internships, we also have faculty industry placement, FIP.
Yeah.
So they go for 15 days.
So these are, and now I think I would like, we have still one more question to go, but I'd like to encourage the audience to write down any questions or queries that they have and pass it on to, I think we have some people helping us. Just hold on, please. Write it down, and if you want to pose that question to any of the specific panelists, do write that down. I don't want people to asking the question because that will take up a lot of time. I want you to write your question on a piece of paper. We can provide that piece of paper and pass it on so that we'll take those questions together. Please, while we move on to the last question that I have, we will take those questions, and then maybe at the end, if we have time, we'll give people the time to ask the question. So please, I'll encourage especially the students and of course the faculty to actually come up with a question. Otherwise, I'll start making cold calls, asking people to ask a question. Okay, the next question is, and this is in a way summing up the first. One of the problems which, one of the issues, I did some work related to entrepreneurship way back, and I was visiting a very leading, one of the top universities in UK. And I met the head of the entrepreneurship center. This was the time when entrepreneurship or incubation centers were not being set up in Pakistan. So I asked him, how do you work and where do ideas for new enterprises come? So, and of course he knew that my association with the business school. He said, if you are thinking about business school people coming up with really risk-based, innovative ideas, forget it. At my university, most of the new ideas come from either sciences or engineering disciplines. The business graduates tack on with those teams because the business aspect is needed. But business people generally, especially those who have invested a lot of time and money in getting an MBA, are primarily looking at getting a good return. This was about 20 years back. Things have probably changed. So what is your view, I'll ask this panelist, does this thing still hold that the business school graduates are more risk averse as compared to the graduates of the sciences or especially the engineering schools? Because if you look at the great developments which have taken place, especially technology related, they have not come from the business school. Business school people have been responding and reacting to what has already happened. So your take on this?
Well, let me give you the example of University of Kentucky. I went to visit their Center for Entrepreneurship, and one was a biochemical engineer, next to him was an economist, the third one was a physicist, fourth one was a business. I said, why are these people sitting together? They say the problem solving is a holistic approach. It is not a monodiscipline which really creates the solutions. The informal interaction between these individuals gives us an enriched insight into what the nature of the problem is and how to go about this. And we form multidisciplinary teams which work on these problems as far as the entrepreneurs are concerned. So I personally think that you are right, that we must not confine ourselves into the silos, because I argue that anthropological insights, sociological insights, political science insights are equally important in resolving some of the business problems as the business schools can do. So it's a multidisciplinary approach, which I think would find solutions to the problem.
How well are we addressing this approach currently in our academic institution? So not at all. Any other comments? Dr. Ishrat. Can you keep it close to you?
Management, and I'm thinking about my students in my PhD, which is so I have physicians, PhD in marketing and strategy. I have people from engineering. My background is mathematics as well, and I'm that. So that is a way to precisely to bring together different fields and disciplines. So I believe that the PhD is not only for teaching, okay, and that is another issue that I find in the Portuguese society. I talk about what I know better, of course, and I don't know always in favor. It's the integration of PhD people in the industry. That is another issue that we have. We have, of course, now that we have the theses that are developed in connection with the industry, and the student can be settled in the industry performing the business. But there is another problem also, to accept the preconcept of accept people from the university to solve the real problems in the company. In certain areas, in certain fields or economic activities, that is accepted. But in others, no, and that is a problem. For instance, in consulting, that I believe it was in consulting field, the PhD people would be very useful. So why not bring that together? This is completely different, for instance, what happens in where people in consulting.
Any other thoughts? You may want to start with a I wanted to now have to leave here. Increasing number of students program, they come from Gen Z. Generation Z in general, they are not risk averse. They take huge risks. They are very short term oriented. They have very short concentration of time span, and they don't listen to me, which is a major risk in the classroom. But I'm not really worried about whether they are risk averse or not. It is their perception of what they perceive as risk. That I think is more important. Because their perception of risk is a reflection of my perception of risk. My perception of risk, my colleagues' perception of risk is predominantly bottom line only, economic risk only. They do not understand that there is also a huge amount of risk which is connected with people and planet. They do not perceive it as which I think that. So this is something which is not just at the level of students, but also at the level of instructors in the school. Which are the dimensional aspect of the risk.
I just wanted to answer a question. I think situation has changed. I do think that, it will not be appropriate to make a qualified answer there because we do not have the numbers. We do not have the statistics. But I think in last 10 years, business school graduates are producing more entrepreneurs. Whether it is more than engineering or less than I don't know. But even if you take LUMS example, you can think of Sunil Manj, you can think of Siddiqui of KSPL, you can think of the guy who did food panda as a graduate. So I think that trend is going upwards. And I don't think that's the case that only non-business schools are doing the startup or the businesses. The idea of the policy, that's where I think the new undergrad policy that HEC has brought in, that requires all undergraduate students to study the general education courses for first 2 years. So that includes sociology, that includes quantitative reasoning, that includes psychology, a course in language, a course in foreign language. But I don't think that is going to get integrated and converge into something.
I'll go to Dr. Carolina, but I just want to add a bit to this question. We all talk about the significance and importance of business school. Have we developed a real measure to assess the impact that we are creating? I mean, we know that there are publications that we look at. We look at the salary numbers, how soon people get a job. Think about the measures so that we can see that okay, how brilliant and innovative individuals are in the sense. I think number of startups that are being set up by a graduate maybe one measure, but I don't think it's a real measure because not everybody will start. Can we have some comments on this before I take up these two questions that come from the audience? Any thoughts on this? Maybe I'll start with Dr. Carolina. Any thoughts on this? How can we come up with some way of assessing?
Very fast here because it's important to listen to the questions from the audience, as you said. There is an approach now that has been developed. Well, it's by EFMD, originally developed in France, called BSIS. Maybe you know that. I don't remember what those letters stand for, but it's EFMD. No, BSIS. BSIS, it's about calculating the impact, the real impact of business schools in their community. So you can have a look to that if you are interested in. I know that my school went through that. We got it. I think it's very imperfect, but as many of these type of approaches at the beginning, there are lots of imperfections, but at least it exists. And for the second one, compared to engineering schools and so on, I think as my other colleagues, I don't know, or at least I don't know about any statistics around that, but my observation with engineering students, which we have many of them in general management programs, is that they come from an environment where they seem to be they seem to have a higher level of humbleness as compared to business school students. And there is an issue, I think, with ego and business school students and business school professors, by the way. And this, what does this mean? It has an impact on society because, as you said earlier, failure can be seen as a shame. We like to somehow show off. So I know that some of us spend a lot of time trying to address this issue with them, and it's not easy at all. We also use models. Very often we use models where themselves they have a big ego when we use those models. And humbleness and humility, even if we talk about it thanks to Jim Collins and whatever it is, but still it's not embedded in the philosophy of business as saying business is a matter of the whole community and not a matter of one egotic person who will be the star. And to me, this hinders the capacity of entrepreneurship, even if we are increasing the amount of courses in entrepreneurship.
Thank you. I think I'll just, there's two or three questions. One is, two questions are about the same thing, so I'm trying to combine those. There is, I have 5 minutes according to that clock. Is to make sure that we are trying to develop entrepreneurship in the business school. But the question is that when you have this requirement to attend a certain percentage of classes and you have to take your midterms and finals, how can you expect students to actually have the time to work on new ideas or entrepreneurship? So that is one question. I think it's probably coming from a student. Any thoughts on this? Maybe we'll start with Dr. Ansar.
I think there's a concept, a very well-known concept in the strategic management called decoupling. And, just have to do some creative accounting and count the experience as the classroom hours. There is no other way around.
Yeah.
Just take them out, do that, count them towards the classroom
Yeah.
hours.
Just to give you an idea, at LUMS, we had a lot of debate whether we should require attendance in class, generally at undergraduate level. And after a lot of debate, although in our MBA program, attendance is a must. So it was decided that we will not insist on attendance in the class. We will try to make the class interesting and value-adding to the extent that the student would like to attend the class. You have instruments like quizzes and other things which will encourage people. And again, I think there's still debate whether that we went too far. But as far as the business school undergraduate is concerned, it still requires, I think, through various measures for the people to attend, because you need to have certain discipline. So it's, I don't know if there's one answer to this question or not. You need to have a balance. Okay. The second related question is as a faculty member, how do you trigger this entrepreneurial instinct? I mean, anything that you have tried which has worked? So people are looking for some ideas. How do you trigger entrepreneurial mindset as a faculty member? Quick responses. Anybody who's tried something which has worked? I'll give you my own input, but once I've heard others. Maybe I'll start with Dr. Carolina. Tell us that one thing which may help trigger entrepreneurial instinct in students that you have tried and which has worked in your opinion.
We have created two things. At the first year of master level, we are doing a weekend, kind of a startup weekend, like the startup weekends which exist at the school level, with like of tutors who are entrepreneurs themselves, most of them alumni, and so happy to come for the weekend. So it's a very agile exercise where students, about 150 students, are put into groups, and they have to create an idea. They are tutored and mentored for 2 days, and they have to pitch it in front of venture capital.
Dr. Carolina has mentioned this is an international organization which gives you a framework. It does work at LUMS. In the School of Science and Engineering very regularly, doesn't work in the business school at LUMS. It's not required. Do you require it, or is it an optional thing for students? Startup.
For the M1 student is required.
Okay, so they have required. It's a great idea. I'll encourage people to look at that. And I think there's support available. Many institutions do this. We do this regularly. But in the School of Science and Engineering, not in the business school. The second question, I don't know. It's a tough one. I can only have quick response to this. Advice for Gen Z PhD students and faculty. What advice would you give to Gen Z PhD students and faculty? Those who are Gen Z and are PhD students and faculty, young faculty basically. Any advice for young faculty? Good advice. Any other advice? Any other advice? Any other advice? Patient. Okay. Yeah. I will just add one bit to that. PhD, and this is something which somebody told me when I was working on my PhD, that forget about focusing on trying to think that you will be solving problems through the PhD. All that you will be learning in the PhD is to define problems and identify that piece of the problem that you learn how to attack. So it is how to attack a problem. So if you're looking at PhD as a way of just publishing and just going on and getting a good job, I think you have lost it before you even started. So focus on what you will acquire. And if you acquire this ability to identify a problem, focus on a problem and come up with a way of addressing that problem, consulting, executive education, teaching, research, everything will come. So I think this was very good advice given to me, which I think has helped me. Dr. Athar.
This is my general advice to all Gen Zs, which is that not everything that generations before you did was wrong. I think there is just too much that Gen Zs are special. They are very different. They're born in technology. They have higher IQs, tech savviness. But whether you're a PhD student, a faculty, whoever you are, you still need some discipline in life. I think that's very important for Gen Z.
There's one question specifically for doctorate. Some of this came first. Faculty, and I'll just read it out, it's not very long. Faculty has to be engaged with community projects that are localized and contextualized in nature. Students are doing social entrepreneurship, but faculty remains isolated from community-related social issues. So how can we put it in structure of performance management so that faculty does this? The doctor. The question is addressed to him, and then I'll come.
I think this is a good suggestion. We haven't thought about it. We introduced the social internship for the students so they can spend some time with the very backward, poor families living in the shanty towns and the, Kachi Abadis. But the idea that we should also get the faculty members involved is a very sound idea. And I think we should think about it. I haven't thought about it. So thank you very much for that suggestion.
Yeah, so you make it, okay. And then make sure that one thing that we have at LUMS is that when you fill out your annual form, this is the last comment, when you fill out your annual form, it does ask about the thing that you have done outside the academic area. So you record that. I don't know how it is being used. Dr. Jawad has been a recent dean. What credit do you get? But at least you get an opportunity to talk about your social engagements. So there's a whole section in that form. So at least that's being recorded. I'd like to close this with thanks to my... Oh yeah, please, I thought you didn't turn in your question. Please go ahead. Go ahead, Ji. Is there any mic? Because please provide a mic there. So I thought you had turned it in because I asked everybody to write the question.
Thank you for this opportunity, and sorry, I understand it was a question format. I want to give two comments. One is that we also need to change the culture of panel discussion. You are talking about innovation, and we are following conventional style of conversation, where expertise speak and we receive. So I think, and two comments. One is that I'm a sociology student of sociology, teaching sociology. From a socio-linguistic perspective, I see that higher education is obsessed and get lured by what I call buzzwords in education. So there is risk, there is entrepreneurship, and the professors and universities brochure and everything would run with it without deepening the concept and ethos. I really appreciate there was a talk on value, there was a connection with society, there was a connection with being and the egos. I have just two comments. One is that we need to rethink what is higher in higher education. and rethink research. I don't know when the higher education policy was shaping research agenda and research culture, they seem to miss total ground realities. And I think some of you, maybe, I have seen experts coming up again and again talking all these beautiful things. But my humble question is, what you did when you were experts and in the position to shape policy? What was the gap between this and that? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for those comments. Actually, I was trying to follow a certain format, but again, those comments are very valuable. We could ask the panelists if you have another 15, 20 minutes as to what they have done, because I know at least 3 people who have done a lot in this country to shape things, who are the panel. And I think what Dr. Carolina was saying, I think he mentioned a lot of things that she has done. So I'd like to conclude this thing with one comment. I have been a panelist and a moderator for many sessions. This has been one of the most educative, insightful panels that I've ever attended. I think I'd like to thank my panelists for their contribution and for the questions, and for the audience for their active engagement through clapping and for raising questions and issues. Because without that, I think some of these people would not have been motivated to contribute the way they contributed. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir.